Now we have a blank remix setup. Click on the contracts folder and click the little page icon to create a new file. A little box will pop up and you can start typing text into it. We're going to type in simple storage.sol. .sol tells our compilers that this is going to be a Solidity file and that we're going to code Solidity in this. Solidity is the primary coding language of smart contracts. There are a few other smart contract languages as well, but Solidity by far is the most dominant smart contract coding language out there. And now we have a simple storage.sol contract on the right that we can actually start coding our Solidity with. So let's start coding some Solidity. Now, if you click on this button right below the Files button that looks like the Solidity logo, you'll see a bunch of stuff pop up in here. These are different parameters for us to actually compile our Solidity code so that we can run it. So the first thing that you're going to need in any Solidity smart contract is going to be the version of Solidity that you're going to use. And this should always be at the top of your Solidity code. Solidity is a constantly changing language and a constantly updating language because it's relatively new compared to other languages. We need to tell our code, hey, this is the version that I want you to use. We can add the Solidity version by doing pragma Solidity and then the version that we want to use. If we want to choose a very specific version, we could say 0.8.7. The most current version to date is 0.8.12, but getting used to different versions of Solidity is good practice. And different versions of Solidity are considered more stable than others. 0.8.7 is one of those versions that is considered more stable. These double slashes here are what's known as a comment. They're places where you can type stuff that won't actually get executed and won't get compiled and isn't really considered part of your code. For example, I could write, hello all, I'm Patrick. And if we were going to run this code, this part of my code would get completely ignored. So this double backslash is how we do what's called comments. And as we're coding and as we're building our projects, be sure to use this comments tool to your advantage. Every time you write a new function or you learn something that you didn't understand or you learn something new that you want to remember, put it in a comment in your code. You're going to be most effective at taking notes in this course by making them comments in your code and then saving your code so you can refer back to it later. So leave comments in your code, leave notes in your code, and that'll be one of the best ways for you to understand what you're coding when you want to refer back to it later. Now, when it comes to the versions of Solidity, there's actually a few different ways we can actually write it. We can say we want to use only 0.8.7, and this is how we would write that. But maybe we're okay if we use a more new version of Solidity than 0.8.7. To tell our code that we're okay with a more new version, we can put a little caret here. And this is how we tell Solidity, hey, any version of 0.8.7 and above is okay for this contract. This means 0.8.8 would work, 0.8.9, 0.8.10, etc. But if we wanted to use just 0.8.7, we would type it like that. If we want to use Solidity versions between a specific range, we could do something like this. We could say we want our Solidity version greater than or equal to 0.8.7, but less than 0.9.0. This means that any compiler between 0.8.7 and 0.9.0 would work. This means 0.8.8 would work, 0.8.9 would work, 0.8.10 would work, but 0.9.0 would not work because it is not strictly less than 0.9.0. 0.9.1 would also not work. To keep things simple for us, we're going to use 0.8.8. And every line of Solidity that's completed, every completed section needs to end with one of these semicolons. This is how you tell Solidity it's the end of the line. Also, at the top of your code, you're always going to want to put what's called an Spdx license identifier. This is optional, but some compilers will flag you a warning that you don't have one. This is to make licensing and sharing code a lot easier. We have a link to more about how licenses work in the section of this lesson in our GitHub repository. To do an Spdx license identifier, we just say Spdx license identifier, and we're going to choose MIT. The MIT license is one of the least restrictive licenses out there, so we use the MIT license for most of our code samples. Once you have a version, and once you have just this much written, we can actually go ahead right to our compiler tab and scroll down and hit compile. That little turn thing will go, and in a minute, we'll see this contract is attempted to be compiled. Since we actually don't have a contract, we see no contract compiled yet, but we see the compiler automatically switched to to 0.8.8. Compiling our code means taking our more human readable code like Pragma Solidity and transforming it into computer code or very specific instructions for the computer to use. We'll go over what a lot of this machine level code or this computer level code is doing in a later section. If you're using a Mac, you can also hit Command S and it'll run the compiler for you as well. On Windows, it might be Control S. We can actually choose the compiler version that we want to use. However, if we tell in our code to specifically use 0.8.8 and we hit the compile button, it'll automatically switch to 0.8.8. However, if we use the caret thing, we could specifically say, hey, we want 0.8.10. We could hit compile and it'll compile with 0.8.10. Because again, remember, the caret says we want to use at least 0.8.8 all the way up to the latest version of 0.8. For now, let's stay on 0.8.8. The next thing that we're going to do in our code is define our contract. And to get a full screen view, you can go ahead and hit the compiler button to get rid of it there. To start defining our contract, we're going to go ahead and write the word contract. This tells Solidity that the next pieces of code is going to be a contract. Contract is a key word in Solidity, and it tells our compiler that the next section of this code is going to define a contract. You can think of a contract similar to a class in any object-oriented programming like Java or JavaScript. Let's go ahead and give our contract a name here. We're going to call ours simple storage. And then we add this little open and close curly brackets. Everything inside this open and close curly brackets is going to be the contents of this contract simple storage. Now, if we go ahead and hit Command S or Control S, we can see this little green check mark show up. And if you don't, you can always go back to the compiler tab, scroll down and hit compile and see the little green check mark. That little green check mark means that our code is compiling successfully and we don't have any errors. We could hypothetically deploy this contract right now and it would be a valid contract. So congratulations on writing your first contract.